All right, guys, we're going to be looking at our last set of notes for the year. And just like the one yesterday on Monday, I'm going to make this to where you don't have to write a thing. I just want you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. You're going to get a one-day overview of the entire Second World War from me today. I don't even know if that's possible to do in a timely manner, because usually I split this into several days worth of notes and we analyze each part rather slowly. I'm just going to kind of rush through this, see what I can do for you, and hopefully it turns out real well. I hope you enjoy this, and like I said, you don't have to actually write anything. Just go ahead and sit back, relax, and enjoy. This is World War II. Now, yesterday we ended by saying that Hitler had invaded Poland, and this is what leads to World War II actually starting, because the moment he does that, England and France automatically declare war on Hitler. The problem is they are vastly unprepared for this war. Now, when war breaks out, Hitler turns his attention west. He invades into France. So June 1940, Hitler invades in France. And most people around the world think this is going to turn out to be something like World War I, where it's a really close battle, a series of battles, and they're going to be entrenched for years. But it doesn't work that way at all. 6 weeks after Hitler invades into France, he takes over the entire country. By June 14th, which is just 2 weeks after he invades, he's taken over the capital. So he's taken over France. This is a picture he took in front of the Eiffel Tower, and backs the British and the French armies into a corner. And it's only a miracle that the British army is able to escape at a place called Dunkirk, which, by the way, is a very good movie, if you haven't seen it, that describes the evacuation of the continent. And with France falling after 6 weeks, they surrender officially to the Germans. England, Britain is alone against Hitler. They have nobody else on their side to help them. It is literally Britain as the only barrier between Hitler and taking over all of Europe. Now, of course, England at the time, you can see from the map here, by late 1940, Hitler owns all the land that's colored in red. All the land that's in green is what's against him, and you can see a little bit of yellow. That's a neutral territory, Switzerland, the same as Spain is technically during this time. Hitler has almost all of Europe, and the only one stopping him at this point is England, Great Britain. And they are led by a bulldog of a man, Winston Churchill, who is the prime minister. The bulldog kind of becomes his symbol for being a really steadfast guy against tyranny. Now, in 1940, Hitler begins an air war against England. England's an island, and he can't take it over as easily as he took over with France by just rolling tanks into it, because you've got this water surrounding England. So Hitler figures the only way of stopping England and taking them over is to destroy all their airplanes through air battles, and then he will be able to dominate the skies enough to protect ships that will allow him to transport troops for an invasion of Europe. Now, this means that he has to basically clear the skies over England, and a huge battle ensues that takes months. It's known as the Battle of Britain. And it's during this time that England is really fighting Germany alone, and they are defending themselves against day after day and night after night of German air attacks. Literally, they would have watchers all over the coast of England looking for enemy planes, looking for enemy bombers, and then sending up the RAF, the Royal Air Force, armed in planes like the Hurricanes and the Spitfires, my personal favorite, to defend against them. They are outnumbered by the Germans 4-1 during this battle, and just about everybody on the planet thinks the Germans are going to win this. This will actually be Germany's first loss during the entire war. They attack the British cities. They bomb London. This is known as the Blitz, and people actually hide out in the London Underground in their subway system to avoid being bombed. They actually send their kids out to the countryside for protection from all of these bombs that are going on. And if you're familiar, there's a movie that deals with this at the very beginning of it called The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The reason those kids are out in the countryside to begin with, even though they're from London, is they were avoiding the Blitz, the bombs that the Germans were sending down. Now, the RAF, the Royal Air Force, they successfully fight back against the Germans, and even though they are outnumbered 4-1, the Royal Air Force wins, destroys much of the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, and ends up being victorious. England is saved from invasion, and that's at the end of 1940. And they were so outnumbered at the end of this, Winston Churchill himself, the Prime Minister of England, says, "Never was so much owed by so many to so few." Talking about the pilots of the RAF who won this massive battle. Now, Hitler makes a huge mistake in the middle of all this. At the same time that he's attacking England, he decides he wants to take over Russia, the USSR, at the same exact time. So he invades Russia, which is led by a guy named Joseph Stalin. Okay? This is a huge mistake because when he fights these battles in the Russian winters where the German tanks end up freezing and slowing down, he's going to suffer some major defeats over there. At the same time, though, in 1940, the United States is doing its absolute best to stay out of the Second World War. We want to be neutral. We want to avoid war all over again. So we are doing everything possible to keep the U.S. out of the war. Now, our president at the time is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt, known as FDR, he personally supports England. He does not like Germany. He hates Adolf Hitler, but he knows if he sends ships over to attack the Germans, that's a declaration of war. So he helps out in the only way he can. He lends things to the British. He gives them supplies. He lets them borrow things so that even though he knows we're not going to get paid back and some of these things that they're borrowing, some supplies and stuff, he's hoping this will allow England to survive until Americans start to change their mind and perhaps want to enter the war eventually. Now, in the meantime, the Japanese are busy taking over parts of Asia. So they are going around taking over parts of China. There's battles going on over there. And Americans do not want to be helping the Japanese in the middle of this. We don't want to be seen as people that are helping out their cause. So we cut off all oil supplies that we were providing to Japan. We say, nope, you don't get to use, we're not going to sell you oil anymore for your tanks, for your planes, for your ships. You're not going to have any more gasoline. And the Japanese are furious at the United States over this. So much, they begin to plan on how to successfully go to war against America. And they start developing plans to fight back. They secretly plot a way of being able to attack American forces in the Pacific Ocean, which our Navy at the time is based at a place called Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. But on December 7th, 1941, at 7:55 or 7:56 in the morning, hundreds of Japanese planes sneak attack. Early in the morning, they had traveled by aircraft carrier across the Pacific Ocean secretly, and they do a sneak attack on Pearl Harbor. And during this attack, nearly 2,000 Americans lose their lives. Most of our Pacific naval fleet is destroyed. Only our aircraft carriers are spared because they were out on maneuvers and weren't based at their harbor at the time. Pearl Harbor is attacked, and this sneak attack propels the United States into the Second World War. You can kind of see what it looks like here. At 7:55 in the morning, it's a peaceful Sunday morning. The Japanese chose a Sunday morning on purpose because they knew most Americans would be either sleeping in or at church. And they try and wipe out as many of our battleships, destroyers, submarines, support craft, and oil reserves to cripple our defenses in the Pacific. What they don't realize is they have wakened a sleeping giant. They have stoked Americans to an anger that we rarely feel, and Americans are so upset about this, we almost unanimously declare war the very next day. This is kind of what Pearl Harbor looked like here with all the ships in a row. Most of our fleet was sunk, but Americans come out of this resolved to punish the Japanese for what they did during the sneak attack. Especially with the way the Japanese started it here, because normally in war what you do is you declare war against somebody, then you attack them. That's the I'm not going to say polite process, because war is never polite, but it was the accepted way of doing things. You don't sneak attack someone. But the Japanese did sneak attack, and then they sent a formal declaration of war a couple hours after the event had taken place. It completely takes us by surprise. Now, some people will debate, did the United States know about this? I think the proof is pretty certain that we knew an attack was going to happen somewhere, but nobody, not Roosevelt, not any of the admirals or the generals in the United States military at the time, none of them suspected that a huge attack would take place in one of our strongest military locations. They expected it in other places like the Philippines or across the ocean. And some ships actually still remain sunk to this day. The most famous ship to be sunk during Pearl Harbor was the USS Arizona, which took a single bomb in the front of the ship, which landed in their arsenal, in their gunpowder room, basically, blew up the front half of the ship, and it sank, killing almost 1,000 sailors on board in less than 5 minutes. And to this day, we have a memorial celebrating the memory of those who lost their lives during that sneak attack. If you go to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, it is still there to this day. It is a memorial to them, and so you can go visit if you would like to. On December 8th, President Roosevelt speaks in front of Congress. America declares war. We have entered the Second World War. People living in England at the time, they don't cheer the fact that Pearl Harbor was bombed, but they cheer the fact that America has now entered the war, and they have somebody supporting them and helping them out. And of course, Americans are enraged. They want to avenge December 7th. Now, when America enters the war, we're going to fight the war in two different places. We're going to be fighting Hitler in Europe, the European theater of the war. So if you look at the different theaters, there's the war in Europe against the Nazis and Hitler, but we're also fighting the Japanese in the Pacific at the same exact time. Now, when I discuss the rest of the war here, I'm going to first start with one half of the war. We're going to look at the European side of things from 1941 to 1945. Then I will go back and look at the Pacific theater, the things that are happening at the same time there. Normally what we would do is, in class, I would spend a day on each of these theaters, and we'd look at it in depth, going over the major battles that happened. But today, I'm just going to give you a real brief overview. Okay, so let's focus on Europe first. Europe at the time is completely taken over by Hitler, and Hitler's army, his military, is much stronger than the United States military at this time. He has millions of soldiers. We don't even have 100,000 soldiers when the war first breaks out. So we don't invade Europe first. We don't go attack the places where Hitler is strongest. We attack the places where he's weakest. And his weakest area is in North Africa. So that is where we invade first. We actually end up losing our first battle against the Germans. The German commander at the time is a guy named his name is General Erwin Rommel, and his panzer divisions, his tanks, his German tanks, control most of North Africa. Well, we invade, and huge battles ensue. We send one of our best tank generals, a guy named George Patton, to attack, and he successfully kicks Rommel's butt in North Africa. We drive the Germans out of Africa after several months of fighting, and we learn very quickly this is very nasty fighting. It's very difficult to do, but it also shows that we can defeat the Germans. This is Operation Torch. So with Africa now under Allied control, England and America own it now, we focus on another weak area of the Germans, which isn't France or Germany or any places like that. We look at Italy. Italy is on the side of the Germans. We determine they're weak enough that we probably stand a good enough chance to be able to take over that territory next. So we begin the Italian campaign. All right, this is Operation Husky. General Patton and his tanks land in Italy, and we invade first in a place called Sicily, and then we work our way up the rest of Italy and attack place after place from 1943, I believe, all the way to, well, we're still fighting in Italy at the end of the war, but this starts in 1943, and the fighting in Italy lasts for at least 2 years afterwards. Okay? So we invade, and we successfully take Italy. Meanwhile, at the same time, I know this looks like a lot, but don't worry too much here. It's not too bad. the Germans, who are invading into Russia, end up losing major battles. Stalin, the leader of Russia, stops the invasion and actually starts to drive the Germans back. Okay, so Hitler is not able to take over Moscow or Stalingrad, the two leading cities over in Russia at the time. And so basically what's happening is you've got the Americans attacking south of Germany, you've got the Russians attacking east of Germany, and you've got Britain on the west of Germany. What you can see here is Germany is starting to get surrounded. And during this whole time, we start to prepare to invade into German territory, to win back France and Germany itself. That invasion will be known as Operation Overlord, June 6th, 1944, also known as D-Day. Now, D-Day does not mean Destruction Day. It just means the day we were going to invade. I'm actually filming this on June 7th, so this is the day after the anniversary of D-Day. And during this battle, what happens is we launch the largest water-based naval invasion that has ever occurred in all of history. Millions of men are transported across the English Channel, which is about 20-some miles across, and we invade into a territory in France called Normandy on 5 separate beaches. June 6, 1944, the Allies, which are the Americans, the British, and some French forces, the ones that had escaped Germany when France had been taken over, invade German territory to try and reconquer or liberate France. By August, just a couple months later, Paris is free, most of France is free, and the German troops are retreating back into Germany itself. Again, this is 1944, okay? By April 1945, we have invaded so much that Germany is completely surrounded on all sides. They've got the Russians on one side, they've got the British and the Americans on the other, and there is no retreat possible. By April 30th, 1945, Hitler commits suicide in a bunker, and the Germans, they only last for another week or two before both the Soviet, the Russian armies, and the American and British armies invade into the capital of Germany, Berlin, and force a German surrender. On the day they surrender, they call that the Victory in Europe Day, or VE Day. Germany has lost the war. Okay? This is May 8th, 1945. Germany surrenders. That part of the war is over. The war in Europe is over. But don't forget, there is also a war happening on the other side of the world at the exact same time. So let's now focus on the war against the Japanese in the Pacific. Okay? Now, at the beginning of the war in 1941, the Japanese had tried to take over all kinds of American territories on the same exact day that they attacked Pearl Harbor. The goal was to take over all this territory and leave the Americans as weak as possible. So on December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor is attacked. Okay? Most of our fleet is destroyed except our aircraft carriers, and at the same time they attack the British territories in Thailand and Malaysia. And then in April 1942, the Philippines, which the American Army owns under and is controlled under a general named Douglas MacArthur, those fall to the Japanese as well. The Japanese take over places like Guam, and finally they decide they want to attack an island which is close enough to Hawaii that if they take over this island, they will be able to launch an invasion of Hawaii and not just attack our naval bases there, but take over an area close enough to the United States continent itself that they could launch an invasion into California or Oregon or Washington. They attack an island that is midway, halfway between Japan and America. It is called Midway Island. Up to this point, the Japanese are winning this war, battle after battle, and the Americans are losing. Midway is the thing that turns all of that around. Now, I've got a video that I normally show here, and I'm not going to because it's a 7 or 8 minute video. And if you want to watch a really good movie about the Battle of Midway, there is a movie that came out just last year called Midway. Came out in 2019. It's about 2.5, 3 hours long. It is an amazing movie. It's excellent. It's rated PG-13. But basically what happens is the Japanese send their aircraft carriers and a huge invasion fleet to attack the island of Midway. But we have broken the Japanese codes, radio codes, and we know where they're going to attack. So the Japanese send 4 aircraft carriers there. We send all that remains of the Pacific Fleet, 3 aircraft carriers, the Yorktown, the Hornet, and the USS Enterprise, to intercept the Japanese fleet and attack. Long story short, 3 of our aircraft carriers take on 4 of theirs, and their support ships, they basically outnumber us 2 to 1 with the rest of their ships and planes. But because we know exactly when and where they are going to attack, we launch an invasion, we launch an attack on their fleet, sink all 4 aircraft carriers, and only lose 1 of them ourselves. It is a huge American victory. And of course, with no aircraft carriers for Japanese planes to land on at the end of the battle, they lose almost every single fighter plane that they sent to try and invade this island. We successfully defend the island of Midway, and from this point forward, we are on the attack and Japan is on the defense. It is a huge military victory. We spend the next 2 years, 3 years, from 1942 to 1944, island hopping, attacking the Japanese in several different parts of the Pacific Ocean with the idea, the goal of taking over islands that will let us get closer and closer to Japan and eventually be able to launch a successful invasion of Japan. Okay? So in April 1942, we have this huge victory at Midway. Japan is on the defense. And then, like I said earlier, we skip around from island to island and only attack the Japanese in certain places that are going to be strategically advantageous. This is known as island hopping. Okay? From August 1942 to February 1943, we fight a huge, brutal campaign in islands near the Philippines called Guadalcanal. And it's devastating. We send the U.S. Navy down there. We launch invasions of these islands with the U.S. Marine Corps, and it is devastating fighting. We win, but it is absolutely brutal. We just barely win. We attack an island in 1944 in June called Guam and successfully take it. We attack all kinds of different areas. The biggest naval battle ever fought in all of history happens in October 1944, the Battle of Leyte Gulf. This is a battle you don't hear of very often, but it's this battle where the American Navy is fighting what's left of the huge Japanese Navy, and we send everything against them, and they send everything against us. And at one point during the naval battle, they trick the American fleet into going to a place where the Japanese Navy isn't, and the Japanese try to invade a set of islands, and the Japanese have battleships and what's left of their aircraft carriers and huge vessels, and America's only got a small fleet of destroyers guarding the islands because the main American fleet has run off somewhere else chasing a red herring. They're on a wild goose chase. And these destroyers decide to stand and fight against the Japanese Navy and win during this battle. It's huge. They cause the Japanese to retreat. It is a huge battle, and I encourage you to read up on this. Most of the Japanese fleet is destroyed during this time. By February 1945, we are in a position to attack the islands right around Japan. And the 2 most important ones we consider to attack next are the islands of Okinawa and Iwo Jima. We believe that if we can take these islands, we will be able to successfully attack Japan. So first, we attack the island of Iwo Jima, because if we do that, we will be able to create air bases there, basically landing strips, to be able to bomb different parts of Japan. Now, This is a huge battle. It takes months to win because the Japanese are dug in. They have underground caves all throughout this island, and it takes us months to be able to take over successfully. But one of the most iconic pictures of World War II comes out of the Battle of Iwo Jima when U.S. Marines are charging up a mountain called Mount Suribachi, and when they get to the very top, they plant this flag, and a photographer captures the moment when they are planting the flag. They plant a smaller flag originally. This is the second flag planting on the top of the mountain, but it has the same effect. This shows patriotism here. We capture the island and we're that much closer to taking over Japan. Now, in 1945, the president dies. He's not assassinated or anything. He ends up getting a hemorrhage in his brain. He ends up dying, and his vice president, Harry S. Truman, becomes president of the United States. And after the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, which I don't believe I went over yet, but during that battle, the Japanese take what's left of their planes and attack the Americans by doing suicide attacks, basically taking their planes and crashing them into American ships. The Japanese call this kamikaze, the divine winds that they believed would protect them against invasion. Truman, when he becomes president, he's got a decision to make. He sees the destruction at Okinawa. It is one of the bloodiest naval battles in all of history because of all the suicide attacks. And the Americans, we have a huge amount of casualties during this battle. And Truman has a decision. Do we invade Japan itself? And he asks his generals, if we invade Japan, how many people are we going to lose? And the American generals estimate that we could lose as many as 1 million American casualties. Or do we unleash a brand new weapon that Truman just learns about for the very first time the day he becomes president? He learns the American scientists at the time in a place called Los Alamos, New Mexico, have been developing a mega bomb called the atomic bomb. We would know this as nuclear power or nuclear bomb now, but they are developing an atomic bomb. His choice is, do we risk 1 million American lives by invading Japan, or do we unleash this destructive bomb with which a single drop can destroy an entire city and hundreds of thousands of people living in that city instantly? Truman makes a decision. This is a very controversial decision even to this day. But in August 1945, after days of sending warnings, leaflets, they're flying over warnings to a place called Hiroshima, a city over in Japan. They warn them, get out of the city because in a few days we are going to drop the most devastating weapon of all time on you. People don't believe this. They don't believe that such a weapon can exist, and most people end up staying in the city. But in August 1945, the first atomic bomb is dropped on Hiroshima. 70,000 people are vaporized immediately. 48,000 buildings are destroyed within seconds, and the city is leveled. You can actually see a picture of what the city looked like the last day. There's only a couple of buildings standing in the entire place. And 100,000 plus people die over the next several weeks because of the radiation poison that they get exposed to when the atomic bomb is dropped. Then, I think it's a few days later, I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact time off the top of my head, but we talk to the Japanese government, we call up their emperor, we write him some telegrams and say, surrender now or we're going to continue to drop bombs on you, just like what happened at Hiroshima. And the emperor and his generals refuse. And so days later, the United States drops another bomb on Nagasaki, which with similar results. It kills hundreds of thousands of people, buildings are vaporized, and within days, the Japanese government agrees to surrender. And then on September 2nd, 1945, the American fleet pulls into Tokyo Bay, Tokyo being the capital of Japan, and the Japanese formally surrender to the United States. America has won the war and now becomes a period of peace where we try and rebuild Japan and rebuild relationships and try and create a safer world again. And that is how World War II ends. Now, I realize This was an extremely quick overview. I'm sorry that we had to end it this way, but this is a really brief history of what happened during World War II and how America, when we emerge from this, we are now the only country in the entire world that has these types of weapons. This will change within a couple of years, but we emerge as the world's first superpower, and it sets up all the rest of the events for the remaining 20th century. We are in power, we are seen as the most powerful nation on the planet, and we have remained so to this day. And it's all as a result because of World War II. All right, so that's the history of World War II. I hope you guys found that interesting, and have a great day. Thank you.